Program, President Donald Trump is imposing a 10% baseline tax on imports from all countries and even higher tariff rates on dozens of nations that run trade surpluses with the United States.
In a few moments, I will sign a historic executive order instituting reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world. Reciprocal. That means they do it to us and we do it to them. Very simple. Can't get any simpler than that.
It threatens to upend much of the architecture of the global economy and trigger broader trade wars. Trump is declaring a national economic emergency to launch the tariffs, which are expected to produce hundreds of billions in annual revenue. This is important because the word reciprocal is being used. These are not tariffs that we're implementing on countries because we dislike them or we want to hurt them. These are tariffs to equalize the tariffs they've already placed on our goods and services. Joining me now to discuss is day one of reciprocal tariffs and where potential tax cuts could come into play is Executive Vice President of National Taxpayers Union, Brandon Arnold. Brandon, welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's good to see you. So talk to me about your take on this. Taxpayers are concerned. The market is kind of down and responding to this news. The Germans actually had one of their leadership from the EU come out and say that they hold the cards. They have the largest market. They want to negotiate now. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, my ideal tariff rate is 0% across the board. So to the extent that we can get closer to a situation where we have low tariffs, both on imports coming into the country and on tariffs that our American-made goods are facing overseas, I support that. But I do worry quite a bit about the nature of these tax increases that are going to take place, given the fact that Americans are already maxed out when it comes to their credit cards, when it comes to the amount of debt that they've taken on for cars, for school loans, mortgages, and so forth. We can't really afford to spend more on stuff. And tariffs are designed to increase prices. So I think that's what will take place here. So we need to quickly reach a resolution with other countries to drive down tariff rates, both on imports and exports, so we can resolve these trade wars quickly as possible.
Yeah, so the idea here is that this is a negotiating tactic, but it also changes the dynamic. We're in a post-World War II footing where I shouldn't say German, it was all of the European nations. They really needed assistance from America where we weren't impacted in our homeland, on our soil from the war. So we were basically subsidizing these countries to help them rebuild. And it was a new paradigm, America as a world leader, kind of deciding what would happen and also distributing some of the largesse of our booming economy. Now we are borrowing $2 trillion a year. And I'm just surprised, Brandon, and I shouldn't be, but I am, to see Democrats really, they're just lying about what President Trump is trying to do. They won't even acknowledge that we're on a fiscal cliff and we're teeter-tottering on the brink of destruction. And these actions are meant to help shore up our economy.
Yeah, I mean, and what we can't afford those $2 trillion annual deficits. There's no question about that. We need to get federal spending under control. That should be first and foremost on the president's agenda. And I think he's already made a lot of headway there with what we've seen from DOGE and certainly what Congress is going to do, hopefully with a really good reconciliation bill that not only cuts taxes to stimulate growth, but also starts to cut spending in a very meaningful way. I think those need to be the priorities of the president here. The trade war, I think that's an extremely high risk approach here to governance. I would like to see us be less of, a stabilizing force in the world. There's no question that Europe needs to pony up a little bit more to keep the peace in their section of the globe. But at the end of the day, we should be approaching things from a low tax perspective. So I do hope that we are able to reach agreements with each and every one of these countries to drive down tariffs, to open up markets for U.S. goods in each and every country that we're dealing with here, because we create a lot of great products in the United States, and those markets should be wide open for American products.
Yeah, Brandon, I was watching. It was a video clip of a story. There's an NFL player. He, of course, has a baby mama. She's come to court to get payments from him for child support, and he's on the hook for $5,000 a month. So he basically said $5,000 a month times 18 years is $1 million. And so he issued her a check for that amount. Well, the real story is not the kind of weird baby mama and paying up front and all that. The real story is that if that payment isn't properly categorized as child support, she would be on the hook for 40% of that going to the federal government. And so while everyone else is in the comments arguing about, the morality of having children with 50 different women and paying $1 million here and $1 million there, I was thinking about the fact that any American who comes into a large sum of money is instantly on the hook, especially if it's a large sum like $1 million. You're on the hook to give the government 40%. And my question is, for what? For what reason does a person who comes into $1 million owe the government 40% of that right off the top, when a person who makes a lot less money owes zero tax, and middle class Americans pay a huge tax burden, but it's not huge in relation to wealthy people who comprise the majority of the tax paying burden? The system that we're currently operating under is trash. But you know what's interesting about that? No one talks about why we owe the government 40% of anything that we come into. If someone gives you a car, you owe 40% of the value of that car to the government. I owe taxes on our house. We pay taxes annually. We pay a higher tax burden when they say our house is worth more, even though we haven't realized any of the value of our house going up in value. We just pay more because they say the land underneath the house is worth more. Well, what could we do with that land other than have this house sit on it? We are being robbed by these entities, and no one's really discussing that.
Yeah, it really makes you feel like you don't own anything, right? Because if the government can step in and take it from you, then it doesn't really feel like yours so much. But no, we need comprehensive tax reform. I don't think there's any question about that. I don't know if we're going to go that far in this conversation in 2025, but in 2017, we made huge headway toward simpler taxes. We're now at a point where 91% of taxpayers get to take the standard deduction. They have a much easier process to file their taxes. Unfortunately, over the years, we keep seeing more stupid credits and deductions enter into the tax code. That happened very, very quickly during the Biden administration with the Inflation Reduction Act, all of these green tax provisions, credits, and so forth for people that were already wealthy and that were already buying electric vehicles. We're giving them $7,500 a pop. All this stuff is nonsense, and this all needs to be shredded as we go through the tax reform process here. Again, I'm not sure if Congress is going to be quite as bold as I would like, but we need to level this tax code to make sure that it's fair for everyday Americans and hardworking Americans out there, rather than just catering to a few folks in certain favored states or professions. And unfortunately, that's the direction that we went under the Biden administration quite a bit.
Yeah, I love your point about the TCJA, and that's something that's up for renewal this year. And I know President Trump wants to go even further, lowering the business tax to 15%, which would make us the most competitive nation in the world and would draw businesses to American soil. But I want to return to the tariffs for just a second. Immediate reactions to Liberation Day, as President Trump called it yesterday, are that Mexico has announced they're not going to levy retaliatory tariffs against us. And the Ontario premier said he's willing to drop all of the tariffs that their area actually levies against the United States. So it's not as bad as we expected.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be some wins and some losses associated with Liberation Day here. There's going to be countries that are quickly changing their policies and opening up their markets, and there's going to be some countries that dig in and impose retaliatory tariffs on our businesses and our consumers here. So I think it's going to be a mixed bag. But overall, people are going to pay higher tariffs. I don't know for how long or how much, but we are facing a situation where we could be hundreds of billions of dollars in higher tariffs paid. And if that's the case, prices are going to increase. Which is why I really think it's important to have very targeted negotiating objectives, to be very aggressive with these countries and driving down their trade, their tariff and non-tariff barriers, and reaching a resolution so we have more certainty, so that businesses can invest in this country, knowing that they have a stable regulatory and tax and trade environment to build their business plans, to grow jobs, and to create opportunities for more Americans.
I love it. So, Brandon, I think a little bit of short-term pain to get the trade equalized is going to be something that is going to bring jobs back to America. The car manufacturers are already announcing bringing plants and stalling plants in Canada and Mexico and bringing the plants back to the U.S. Those are additional jobs for Americans. That drives GDP. It also drives growth for personal wealth and attainment. We got to have that. Brandon Arnold from the National Taxpayers Union. The handle on X is @NTU. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.